Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Kier, and joining me, as always, is Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
We're going to begin on some sad news for Steeler Nation and really the NFL community and everybody in Pittsburgh. The Steelers chairman and owner, Dan Rooney, passed away at age 84. Austin, is there anything you want to say about Mr. Rooney?
This is just a huge loss to the Steelers and Steelers Nation, and my condolences go out to his friends and family. He was a great man who really left a lasting impact on the people around him. Not to mention the Steelers wouldn't be the champions they have been without him. So thank you for all you've done, Mr. Rooney, and rest in peace. You have anything to say?
Yes, I do. Mr. Rooney has been the only official owner of the Steelers that you and I have ever known. The Steelers are known remarkably for their ownership and the fact that their family has been the only owners of that group since the team was founded in 1933 by Dan's father, Art Rooney, who died in 1988. Dan took over most front office operations right before the Steelers' 1970s dynasty, so there's reason to believe that the Steelers really became what they were when Dan Rooney started running things and calling the shots in the front office. Dan Rooney was really an incredible person, just like his father. It was so interesting how they were so similar in the way that they conducted themselves and the way that they always treated people the way they wanted to be treated. And I for one, wasn't expecting such a large outpouring of maybe just the way everybody reacted. I mean, I knew people were going to be sad, and there was going to be a lot of talking about how he was such a great person, but I was really surprised to see all the different people that came forward and were talking about what a great person he was. I mean, we all knew these things, but it's another to see all the things that people were saying, whether it's former players, former coaches, guys like Bill Cowher, Troy Polamalu. I even saw Ryan Mundy talk about in a tweet how one time he complained about buying a meal for however much. I think it was like a $10 meal or something, and then he noticed that Dan Rooney was buying that same meal, so he never really tried to see himself as greater than anybody else. You know, you listen to all the stories, they're all pretty much the same thing. I mean, he would sit on the back of the team's coach bus on the way to road games that were close by, and he'd always sit in the back row, and he said that was always because, you know, the players had a game to play tomorrow and he didn't. So he was just a really humble person, and it's certainly a big loss for Steeler Nation, for the city of Pittsburgh, and for the NFL too. There were so many things that he did, and it was really great to see all the outpouring of respect from everybody, including even people that you wouldn't normally expect to hear nice things from, like people from Cleveland, talking about how they remembered that he was one of two owners that voted to keep the Browns in Cleveland when they originally relocated. Even Vontaze Burfict went to Twitter paying his respects to Mr. Rooney, and I think that really speaks to what an incredible person he was, and it really is a lot of Pittsburghers have some heavy hearts today, so rest in peace, Mr. Rooney. So moving on, Austin, it's official now. Ben Roethlisberger will be returning for his 14th season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. What are your thoughts?
I don't think anyone really took him serious, not when the Steelers are this close to being a championship team. What were yours?
Well, I second your opinion. This wasn't shocking at all. You and I both saw this coming, and we discussed this at length earlier in the offseason. I really don't think there's anything else we need to say about this particular topic. And as you noted below here, the preseason schedule has been released for the NFL, and the NFL regular season schedule will be released in Thursday. And I, for one, can't wait. And I know you do too.
Oh, yeah, I'm excited.
All right. Next on the list, a few reports have been coming out over the past week and past couple of days here that Marshawn Lynch could be flirting with coming out of retirement to play for the Oakland Raiders. That would require some sort of trade. And what do you make of all this about Marshawn Lynch unretiring and potentially going to the Raiders?
finally Marshawn Lynch has stayed in good football shape in his time off, and now that he would be behind a really good line when he was a good running back behind the Seattle Seahawks line, he could be very dangerous there in Oakland, and that's scary. I mean, Oakland's problem is not offense. They already had one of the better offenses, but adding Marshawn Lynch, assuming he really still is in shape, that's disgusting. That's just awful. What do you think?
I don't really know what to make of it. I know Marshawn Lynch was always a pretty good running back in his time in Seattle, and he was actually a pretty decent running back in Buffalo, too, for those here who would remember him. But I do think it's interesting to note that you don't usually know what's going to happen with the running back when they take time off. You have the potential, like you said, if he's staying in good shape, that he could be someone like D'Angelo Williams or even like Adrian Peterson when he came back from that ACL injury. But it's really hard to tell with a running back like him who's starting to get towards that magic age of 30. In fact, I don't remember. I think he's 29, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, he's near that magic age of 30. And he's not like D'Angelo Williams, where Williams was always splitting carries with Jonathan Williams. Jonathan Stewart. Jonathan Stewart in the backfield in Carolina for all those years. Marshawn Lynch was always the man there, so I think it could be a little different, but if he plays up to what we know he can play, it will make Oakland a very good offense again. So, moving on to Steelers news, we are looking at the outside edge rushers this time. So, the NFL doesn't really have a 4-3-3-4 teams anymore. They run mostly sub-package football with all the 3 wide receiver sets we see, so we tried to group these prospects together, and it's because the draft is coming up, we figured we'd try to get this position done because we think it's one of the most important positions going into the draft for the Steelers. So looking at what we have right now for the Steelers as far as their edge rushers go, what do you think about what the Steelers have, Austin?
The best one is no doubt James Harrison. He's the ageless wonder. I'm glad he's coming back for 2 more years. The fact that he's a viable starter at his age while simultaneously being a leader, fantastic. Next up, my opinion of Bud Dupree has changed since we drafted him. I thought he was going to be a bust player that wouldn't make it very far, but now he looks like he's going to have a promising career. He's a good young starter where the Steelers should have consistency for years to come. After him, it gets a little hazy. Both Chicolo and Moats are best as backups. When the rotation was in effect prior to the Buffalo game, you could tell who you really wanted playing most of the snaps at linebacker, and that was James Harrison and Bud Dupree. While Chicolo is a cheap backup option who also contributes on special teams, Moats is more disappointing as he's more expensive than James Harrison and never really had that breakout season some had hoped. Still, he's a decent backup. And then we have Tyler Matakevich, who's mostly a special teams contributor. He's got a lot of tackles there, so he's not really a starter either. What do you think we have?
Well, the Steelers have, to say the least, a thin and unsure position group, to say the least. Their most reliable player has been the rock of a man, James Harrison. He continues to impress and defy age year after year, seeming to improve due to his incredible work ethic. He is still the Steelers' best pure pass rusher. However, he probably cannot spend the entire season being used as he was down the stretch last season. He's going to have to be monitored closely this upcoming season because I still think at some point he may start to break down. Bud Dupree helped to alleviate some of that work last season when he came back from an injury late in the season, but he was somewhat inconsistent when he played. He showed some signs of improvement last season, but I want to see a little more from him next season, but you really don't know exactly what you're going to get from him. Outside of him, the Steelers have a couple of backups at best in Arthur Moats and Anthony Chicolo. Moats is just... I liked him. I've always liked him, but he always just seemed like a guy to me. I didn't really see anything that he does particularly well other than playing maybe 10 to 15 snaps a game. Anthony Chicolo is a little more interesting. He has some more upside. He went from a purely special teams player in 2015 to seeing a little more time on defense last season. It's possible he could become more of a reliable backup this season and could even play a little more on defense this season, so I'm hoping to see a little bit more of that, but it's definitely not. It's probably the Steelers' worst position group as far as depth going into next season. So one player that they lost at this position was Jarvis Jones, who recently signed with the Arizona Cardinals. Austin, you and I we both have the pretty much the same opinion on Jones, but if you want to say anything about him, you're welcome to.
No, there's nothing we need to say.
Alrighty, we're gonna move on then. So, evaluating this position, do you think the Steelers could have or should still do anything regarding the free agency need at this position?
I would have said so, in all honesty, that they should have. I think the Steelers could have gotten another cheap backup to fight for a spot on the roster next year, but I'm just going to trust the process. And anyway, I don't really have an idea of who they could have or should have gotten anyway. So I'll give them a pass. What do you think?
I don't know the free agency class at this position very well, especially when you consider how long ago free agency started. But I feel as though bringing in another camp body or someone else who could push for a roster spot is not worse than what they have. So I wouldn't have seen the downside in doing that, but it is what it is. So we'll move on to the draft need. So Austin, I think you and I both concur, as well as most of Steelers Nation, that this is a pretty important. The draft need at this position is pretty high. Don't you agree?
I have it on a scale from 1 to 10 out of 9, and 9 is the highest position, highest number any position got. So the roster is rather thin at this position with only 5 guys. 2 of those guys only have 1 year left on their contract, while another will more than likely be retiring at the end of his 2-year contract, which is obviously Harrison. The Steelers are in desperate need of someone who could slowly transition James Harrison out of his starting role and be a consistent pass rusher at the same time. Pass rushing was probably the Steelers' number 1 problem last year, and I completely believe that the Steelers' first-round pick should be an edge rusher. What do you think about the draft need?
I am in complete agreement with you, Austin. This position is not very strong, and it's led by a 39-year-old player, and beyond that, there are question marks all over the position. Like I mentioned before, you don't know what Bud Dupree is going to be at this year, and I think the Steelers should strongly consider taking one in the first round. And honestly, it might be a good idea to take 2 edge rushers in this draft, considering both how deep the class is as far as edge rushers go, and their recent struggles at taking edge rushers in the draft, see Jarvis Jones. So it's definitely an interesting thing to note heading into this draft. Austin, you had a note you wanted to mention before we move on?
This is just a little note for anyone who's listening, because I don't want people to say, oh, that guy's never going to go here or never going to go there. Both Ryan Shazier and Bud Dupree were not supposed to be there when the Steelers drafted them, according to mock drafts, according to most people. And they are now on the Steelers roster. So keep this in mind as we evaluate players that will, in quotations, never be there. Also, I had no clue who Artie Burns was when he was drafted last year, because I didn't evaluate the draft like I had this year. And no mock draft that I saw had him going in the first round, so it works the other way around too. And I did do research. Bleacher Report did have Artie Burns going in the first round last year in one of their mock drafts to the Chiefs, but that was the only one that had him in the first round. Let's move on to your prospects then.
All right. Before I get to that, it's also interesting to note that the Steelers' general philosophy is to draft the best player available at that when they make their selection. So that's usually why they have guys like Shazier and Dupree why they picked them when they did. And as far as Burns goes, I remember hearing that Burns really wasn't linked to the Steelers until about a week before the draft. So it really did catch a lot of people by surprise. But it's just another interesting thing to note that the draft really is almost kind of a crapshoot. So we'll see how things turn out. But I'll get to my first prospect, someone you recommended to me as a potential late-round prospect, and that's Javancy Jones from Jackson State, standing at 6'1" and 239 pounds. He was a star for the Division I FCS Jackson State Tigers. He was the SWAC Conference Freshman of the Year in 2013, and he had the chance to play at a bigger school, but chose to be home near his family. I do know that his mom ended up suffering from some sort of illness, so he had to start his season a little bit later, but it shows that he is a family man and he cares and has passion for what he does too. He finished with All-American honors his senior season with 82 tackles and 19 and a half behind the line of scrimmage. So, looking at his strengths, Jones has a good frame for a linebacker. He has pretty good athleticism that he used to his advantage in college, a great first step and burst going along with lateral agility that allowed him to be a pass rushing specialist at Jackson State. He can rush the passer from either the outside or from inside the tackle box as well. When I was looking at some of his tape, he tends to almost bounce off of running backs who tried to block him and had good pad level when he engaged them. He has good vision. He has good vision for his age, and tracks the ball well after it's been snapped. He doesn't get fooled by misdirection plays often, and has pretty good closing speed. It was interesting to note that in his draft profile that he actually ran down a running back from Utah in the East-West Shrine game, so that's interesting to note. He's also a pretty tough guy. He actually played with 2 broken hands in the 2014 season at the same time. Looking at his weaknesses, the strength of competition in college for him obviously was not great being at Jackson State. Right now, he doesn't have all the bulk that he needs to survive at the NFL level, being at only 239 pounds and kind of lanky. Once he gets stronger, he can become a great weapon. He has good speed rush moves, but like Jarvis Jones found out, you're going to have to be able to be a bull rusher too in order to be an effective pass rusher in the NFL. He doesn't use his hands well enough to get off of blocks, as one would hope. But all in all, despite dominating in college, Jones is probably going to struggle at first to make the transition from FCS college competition to the NFL. He's likely going to be a late round selection, kind of a pick on the last day. He does have a chance to wow some teams with his athleticism and could potentially become a starter or pass rushing specialist in a few years. If the Steelers do take 2 edge rushers in the draft, this is someone who I'd want the Steelers to take as their number 2 guy. Austin, you want to talk to me about your first prospect?
Yes, I'm going to start with my late round guy as well. He is Ejuan. I don't know how to say his name. Ejuan Price, I believe, from Pittsburgh. I'm going to start with his positives. In his last 2 seasons at Pittsburgh, he's had an elite level of production. He has quite the ability to juke inside and bounce back outside to create an edge opening as a pass rusher. He plays strong through redirect blocks to trim the edge, and he can do an explosive spin counter that gives him the edge over blockers. What I saw the most out of it is when he sees a sack opportunity, he really puts all his strength in and makes the play himself. He really bulldogs through blockers when he thinks he can get that sack. Then he's actually really disruptive against the run. But also he has sudden stunts inside, which are often too quick for tackles to counter. And finally, for positives, he takes chances to make the big plays in the backfield. Going to his negatives, his biggest problem is that he missed a lot of time due to injuries. Over 2 seasons were spent injured, so that's obviously bad. I don't like to call players injury prone, but he's suffered a lot of bad injuries to miss out on 2 seasons. So he has slow reaction and transition when forced to make a sharp directional turn. And he doesn't really have good long speed. He only really has burst speed, and because of this, he's often unable to run down running backs headed for the corner. Price isn't the best finisher. He tends to slow down or give up if he doesn't think the tackle is within range, and he seems to tire rather easily or get gas, so to speak. He struggles against tackles with longer arms, as funny as that sounded, and finally, he's missing upper body flexibility and a hip flip, which he needs to turn the corner. You usually like a soft edge rusher over there, but he just struggles with it. So overall, he's a later round guy that I reviewed in case the Steelers decide to address this position twice. He's been mocked in between like rounds 5 and 7 for the most part, and I felt like I needed to look at him because on NFL.com his player comparison was James Harrison, and so more about him is he played in Pittsburgh for the last 5 seasons, so he'd already be familiar with Heinz Field and Pittsburgh if the Steelers were to take him. But he hasn't had a pre-draft visit with the Steelers. And just to go back to say, Javonte Jones is scheduled to have a pre-draft visit with the Steelers sometime this week. But let us go to your number 2 prospect.
I apologize. It's Javonte Jones? Is that how you say his name?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Javonte.
Okay.
Something.
Well, anyways, I do remember, I think it's Awan Price. I think the J is completely silent, but he He was a pretty good player at Pitt, but I didn't think he was. I don't know. I thought that I thought he was good, but he didn't remind me quite like he didn't remind me of greatness quite like Aaron Donald did when he was in Pittsburgh. My second prospect is T.J. Watt from the University of Wisconsin, and that might sound familiar, and that's because he is the brother of Wrecking Ball J.J. Watt from the Houston Texans, the three-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. T.J. Watt came into his own in his final season at Wisconsin. After dealing with injuries and position changes early in his college career, Watt exploded with 63 tackles, 15 and a half tackles for a loss, and 11 and a half sacks on the season, making all Big Ten honors. It's also important to note that, yes, while his brother J.J. is also an NFL player, he has another older brother named Derek, playing as a fullback for the Chargers, so he obviously has NFL pedigree as well. So looking at Watt's strength, he only needed one season of playing time to prove that he was a legit player. He has the desired size and length, standing at 6'4" and 252 pounds for an edge rusher, and because of that size, he can take on bigger tackles too. He attacks blockers with good arm extension and knows how to upset a lineman's balance by using the good push-pull technique. For those who don't know what that is, when you're a defensive lineman and you're engaged with an offensive lineman, if you grab their shoulder pads and you push with one arm and pull with the other, the lineman won't be square to you. So when you do that, you have the ability to kind of move the lineman wherever you want. So that's something that he does very well, and it's helpful for trying to get off blocks. Like his brother JJ, TJ is great at getting into the passing lane and knocking down passes. He's a good player against the run and tracks the ball well. He gets off blocks quickly with his hands and can move well in space when he's asked to drop back into coverage. Also interesting to note that the Steelers love to do this. James Harrison dropped back more than any other Steelers outside linebacker last season, despite the fact that he's their best rusher too. He has a great ability to shoot the gaps in the middle of the line and also takes good angles of pursuit when chasing the ball carrier. Also an underrated tackler too. Looking at his weaknesses, Watt doesn't have a great first step out of his stance and doesn't bend well when he's rushing off the edge. He doesn't have great acceleration, and his poor foot quickness means that he has to win battles with his hands when he's rushing the passer. He plays with a narrow base too often, and he's going to need to add power in his lower body to become a more consistent rusher in the NFL. He's going to have to develop more rushing options, kind of like what Javancy Jones had, like what I was mentioning with Javancy Jones once he gets drafted. Too much of a one-trick pony at this time. But overall, TJ's going to get a lot of attention because of his relation with JJ Watt. He's a hard worker, and although he's probably never going to be as good as JJ Watt, he showed last season that he can play well and he has the physical tools to succeed in this league. I think he could become a high-level pass rusher within a few years. He's been mocked in the early rounds. I've seen usually rounds 1 and 2 is where he's been going, a top 5 edge rusher in his own respect. Austin, you want to give me your next prospect?
Yep, my next one is Hassan Reddick Temple. What's best about Reddick is that he's explosive, and along with being explosive, he's very focused. He can lock onto the ball behind the blockers and chase from there. He doesn't really lose sight of it and doesn't really get confused easily. He has high flexibility, which allows him to change direction quite easily, and he has really good reactive quickness, so when plays turn around really quick. He played running back in high school, which I think helped him become more evasive because he squeezes and slips through small creases and around the edge. And last year, he finished the season with 21 and a half tackles for a loss, which is not too shabby whatsoever. Reddick started his college career as a safety, so he has above-average coverage skills for a linebacker, and also because of his experience as a DB, he has experience on all 3 levels, which is very good. So he's good as a pass rusher, but he could drop back into coverage if necessary. And he's always improving the position of his feet after the contact with the tackle or offensive lineman. And finally, he's difficult to handle on the end because he twists back inside. So next up, he has 2 major concerns in my eyes. The first being the fact that for the NFL, he's undersized for the position that he's trying to play at, and he lacks length, and he will need a little more strength to overcome NFL blockers. But the second is that he wasn't on the field a lot for Temple. He was on the field for less than 70% of the defensive snaps, so I don't know if he could take a huge workload, which is concerning. But other concerns include that his pass rush is mostly reliant on his athletic skill alone, and he lacks a diversified rush plan. And then he missed a lot of tackles in his final 2 seasons, which was 16 in total. So overall, let's talk about his backstory. Rennick was actually arrested in January 2015 for aggravated assault, and this could allow him to fall to pick number 30. However, a lot of mock drafts have him going before the Steelers pick. Bucky Brooks' most recent mock draft has him going number 24 to the Raiders. Daniel Jeremiah has him gone at pick 17 to the Redskins, and Chad Reuter has him going number 15 to the Colts. So as for Rennick's connection to the Steelers, he played with Matakevich last year while he was at Temple, and the Steelers have not yet had an official pre-draft meeting with Rennick. However, they did meet with him at the Combine. And funny enough, his NFL comparison was Ryan Shazier as well. So let's hear about your second prospect.
This is actually going to be my third prospect, Austin.
Third. Apologies.
That's fine. The last prospect I was looking at was Derek Barnett, and I actually made a mistake here, from the University of Tennessee. He made the All-SEC team 3 years in a row for the Volunteers, finishing with 32 sacks in 3 seasons, and had 20.5 tackles for a loss in 2014, which led the SEC. He had 8 tackles and a sack in the Outback Bowl in 2015. Looking at his strengths, he has great hands and he knows how to use them. He attacks the edge with good forward lean, and his feet, arms, and hands work all well in unison to get to the quarterback. He has a good bend around the outside and has good lateral movement to mix things up with the offensive lineman. He can stop the run and rush the passer. If unblocked, he can be like a wrecking ball crashing down the line of scrimmage to make a play, and he's a punishing hitter who will make hard tackles when given the opportunity. He has good field awareness to help him that helps him to recognize misdirection plays and play action plays. He can also drop into space and coverage when asked to on occasion. Looking at his weaknesses, he had a pretty slow start to last season, and he's somewhat undisciplined as a player at that level. He tends to be caught jumping off sides on hard counts too often because he doesn't have a fantastic burst. He'll often guess what the snap count is to help him with his burst. He struggles with change of direction movements once he started moving downhill. Mobile quarterbacks are going to be able to avoid him at times. His long strides make his base inconsistent, which is going to stymie him in some battles and completely take him out of the play if he's not careful. He's going to need to develop more of a strong inside rush in order to become a premier pass rusher. But overall, Derek Barnett has the potential to step in on day one when he gets drafted and become a pass rushing specialist. The team that drafts him is going to have the option to rush him on either the outside or inside as well. He has NFL caliber size and strength, and he was one of the most productive defensive linemen in the SEC last year. All the mock drafts I've seen have him going in the first round, and he would be a fantastic option for the Steelers to pick up. Austin, you want to talk about your next prospect?
Yes. My next one is Takkarist McKinley from UCLA. One of my favorite things about Tack McKinley, as he's been named, is that he plays pissed off all the time, so to speak. Like he's constantly losing, and he's at full speed every play and never giving tackles a break. He plays with so much enthusiasm, and he tries to get as much as he can out of every play. He has high closing speed towards the sideline, so he's good at keeping plays contained because of his long strides. Tack is above average at bouncing off blocks and maintaining focus on the play. And the combination of his speed and long arms give him a rather large tackle radius. And one of his crazy stats from college is that 36% of his tackles came within 2 yards or less of the line of scrimmage. So not too shabby there either. He has shown that he could spin out of blocks to get back into the plays. His pass rush may be a little raw, but it flashes speed and power. Then lastly, his pass rush is really helped by his lateral agility and effort. So let's not go to his problems. The major problem with McKinley is his inability to use his hands. His hand skill and usage is overall very poor, and it hurts his pass rush potential. Adding to this, he lacks slaps, swipes, and rip moves to get the edge as a rusher, and he struggles to get his hands and feet in unison. Other problems include that he has an upright pass rush, which gets him halted and flattened by just average blocking, and he's redirected really easily. And the most of his success has come from effort rather than rush talent and function power, where he needs to combine all three to be a good pass rusher. So about McKinley is another player that's been mocked to go before the Steelers pick in most drafts, with Brooks having gone at 15 to the Colts, Jeremiah at 15 as well, and Reuter has him at 8 to the Panthers. He would be a good addition. He fits their scheme well. The Steelers have had an official pre-draft visit with McKinley already, so they have actually considered it or brought him in just in case. So I don't believe you have another person.
I actually do. I just didn't have him. I didn't have him listed because I originally forgot that we were doing 4 players. But another player I wanted to look at quickly was Carroll Phillips from Illinois, standing at 6'3" and 242 pounds. Big Ten ball carriers found out in 2016 why his nickname was Wildman since childhood. He started his career at the University of Cincinnati, but ended up not playing there. He blossomed as a senior this past year at Illinois, garnering first-team All-Big Ten honors with 56 tackles, 20 tackles for a loss, and a team-high 9 sacks. So looking at his strengths, he flashed disruptive quickness against the run this season, effective in the stunt game with sudden inside charge off the snap. Pursuit and motor efforts are pretty good. He chases the line of scrimmage for the stop and usually doesn't miss out on tackles. He closes out the ball as much as possible before chesting up the tackle. He has good lateral quickness and agility and uses it to track down ball carriers. He has good closing bursts and good acceleration, and he can change. My apologies. He has good balance and will make redirections in play and to play into space. He has a pretty good burst in pass rushing, and he's going to benefit from a wider rush angle as an outside linebacker in the pros. He had pretty consistent production in college ball as well, posting a sack in 8 of his 12 starts in 2016. Some of his weaknesses include the fact that he was only a 1-year full-time starter. Thin lower body possesses no emergency brake when blockers start driving him off the edge. He's going to need to add mass and muscle to handle run-stopping responsibilities, and that's something that's going to take time. His hand usage at the point of attack is not very good. He doesn't shed blocks very well, and he needs to learn more hand skills to counter early punches so that he can get into a more advantageous position so he doesn't lose the hand battle and is immediately washed out of the play. He's kind of a face-up rusher who struggles with keeping his shoulders parallel to the line of scrimmage and tends to track the quarterback, doesn't track the quarterback very well and doesn't have good improvisation skills. So bottom line, he's not a very big or strong player at this time, and right now he has some work to do as far as the pass rushing department goes, but he has good flexibility and athleticism and moldable traits that will give him a chance to succeed in the NFL in time. But for now, Carroll Phillips is a mid-round draft pick projected to go sometime between rounds 3 and 5. Austin, you want to give your final prospect?
Yep. Last one is Tim Williams from Alabama. He's 6'3" and 244 pounds. His best attribute is his quickness. He can get up and out of his stance in no time and moves his feet very quickly. His pass rush is very well developed and is already as sophisticated as an NFL team's pass rush for the most part. He can bend the edge as a rusher or go inside, making every rush have 2 options. He has a lot of pass rush understanding, as he knows when to attack the corner and also when to dip his shoulder and pivot under or around the tackle. His movements and usage of his hands are very well timed, and finally has good foot quickness with the smoothness to drop into coverage and operate in space on zone blitzes. So the biggest concern for Tim Williams is that scouts have reported that he has struggled with Alabama's scheme, and he needs things to be simplified. After that, screen passes and misdirections tend to throw him off, and he has slow reaction time to such things. His build is not really seen for many pass rushers. He has more of a tight end build. Included in that problem is that his arms and chest lack thickness, which show up in his play strength. His initial punch could use some work, while an opposing tackle's well-timed punch can stop his rush in his track. He's slow to get set pre-snap, and finally has some hip tightness that limits his stride length upfield and lateral. So, Tim Williams overall, he's had some off-the-field drug issues, and then also he was caught with a gun at some point. I saw recently, and then this probably really hurt his stop, which makes him a player expected to be there for the Steelers pick. Brooks, Jeremiah, and Reuter don't have him going in the first round, but that doesn't mean the Steelers won't take him in the first round. He has come in for an official pre-draft visit with the Steelers already, so it's not entirely possible. But I do, however, can see if the Steelers were to draft a cornerback in the first, Tim Williams might be there for the second because of his off-the-field issues. But, yeah, that's about it, man.
Alrighty. Well, let's move ahead then. So, Austin, you want to do us a favor and rank your prospects in order of how you'd want the Steelers to draft them. You're welcome to exclude the late round selection since that's kind of a big gap between like who you'd like to see them draft and whatnot.
All right, I'll just go with the ones I think are going in the first round. My number one, I am actually in love with Takkarist McKinley. I just love his name for the first part. I know that doesn't make any sense for real world things, but I like what I saw in his highlight video, and I just think he'd be a great addition to the Steelers. He's a little bit raw, but so was Artie Burns, and they drafted him like that. So I like Takkarist McKinley's upside. Next up is Hassan Reddick. I liked him. There's not much bad about him. He wasn't as good as Takkarist McKinley. And last up is Tim Williams. His off-the-field issues are concerning to me. It's happened multiple times now, and it's just not looking good for him. So how about you? What is your order?
Well, I decided to rank all four of the prospects I looked at, just more so in terms of personal preferences, who I'd like to see a Steeler. And I was originally going to go with TJ Watt as number one, but Derek Barnett just really excites me. I was just reading everything and reading everything that the scouts were saying and looking at his tape, and I was just really excited. I think he's got the ability to come in and be someone that can make a good impact on day one, and that's something that the Steelers desperately need. So I'm hoping that the Steelers are going to be able to pick him up. Second, I've got TJ Watt. You know, he's got the pedigree, and this year he showed that he can play too. I think that he's not as great as J.J. Watt, and he's not going to be as great, but I still think that he can prove a lot of things to a lot of people in this league, and he's still a pretty good player. Third, I had Javancy Jones. Even though he'd be a late-round pick, I think he could become a pass-rushing specialist, and no offense to Carroll Phillips, but the time I spent looking at him, I just feel like Javancy Jones would be a better fit and someone that could probably, as strange as it sounds, despite being a late-round pick as opposed to Carroll Phillips being a middle-round pick, I just think Jones could be someone that could step in faster than someone like Phillips. And I think someone that can step in quickly is something that's most important for the Steelers because, like we said, this is a thin position and something that they need to figure out quickly. So, last thing, Austin, outside linebacker depth chart for 2017. What do you see it as?
No doubt, Bud Dupree and James Harris are going to be on the roster. Then, in my mind, the draft pick is definitely making it. He's going to be first or second round. So then, after that, it gets a little bit hazy. I'm going to say that we actually keep everyone from last year, Arthur Moats, Anthony Chico, except for Steven Johnson. I think not Steven Johnson. My bad. I think Matakevich gets cut, even though he's a young player. I don't know why. I got the feeling in me. What do you think?
I tend to agree with you, but it's strange. Like we were talking about it. Matakevich seems to be listed at inside linebacker, but on the website I pulled for the salary information here, he was listed at outside, so that's interesting to note. But I agree with you. I have Harrison and Dupree starting on the outside. A draft pick, Dupree. All right, let me back up, actually. I have Bud Dupree starting, and then I think for the first half of the year, you're going to have James Harrison starting on the other side. Then around midseason, I see the Steelers' draft pick kind of replacing Harrison and kind of start taking some playing time from him, while Harrison will be more of a situational guy. And then backing them up, I have Arthur Moats and Anthony Chickillo. So that's the way I see the Steelers' depth chart on outside linebacker for next season. Austin, is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap this episode up today?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right. Next up, I'll post this episode. I should have the offensive linemen, both tackle, guard, and center prospects up soon. We'll have this one up, and then I think next, Austin, we'll look at cornerbacks or inside linebackers, and then I'll finish up the defensive line and safeties too. So if you have any questions about the show, please check us out at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. On Twitter, our username is at @stronger_steel. On Facebook, it's Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Check out our episodes on YouTube and SoundCloud, the name Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Austin, thank you again for joining me, and it's the month of the draft. It's just a couple weeks away, and I couldn't be more excited.
Oh, I can't wait either.
All right, Austin, you take care and have a good night, and good night, Steeler Nation.